So how much did you sell the company for?
So we sold the company for 20 million.
And so you took 10% of that, so 2 million was your cut?
Yep. Yep. It was awesome, but also probably the most stress I ever felt in my life. And it was a great example for me of relationship with money and how it has actually almost nothing to do with how much money you have or don't have.
Can you expand on that, what you just said, where it was a good example of your relationship with money and how it has nothing to do with how much money you have?
I could open up my bank account and see like more money than I've ever seen in my personal bank account, right? And it's like, holy crap. And realize that, you know, there was a story that my mind created around that. Like, this is so stressful. Like, I'm freaking out. Every penny that gets spent, I feel like, yeah, but this is a limited resource now. I'm living more scarce than I've ever lived, and I have more cash than I've ever had.
Garrett, thanks so much for joining me today, man.
Yeah, I appreciate the invite. This should be fun.
So I have to ask you, before I bring a guest on the show, there's a survey and I ask how you want to be introduced. And you put America's sweetheart trash man.
Yeah, there we go, man. There we go. Yeah. So I grew up with my dad in the trash business, and always growing up, whenever we'd travel anywhere or anything, people would ask, "What do you do?" And it always bugged my mom when my dad would be like, "Oh, I'm a trash man." So anyway, and then when I took over the business, there was a real opportunity to kind of do personal branding and things like that because no one was really doing it in the trash industry. So it's just kind of a joke that makes me laugh a little bit because in the trash world, like I go to trash expos or whatever, and it's like people are taking selfies with me. It's like my fame is very, very, very niche, and so yeah, I don't know. America's sweetheart trash man. I'll go with that.
Okay. All right. So I think that's a good place to start. I would love to hear just, obviously you're a millionaire now, but would love to hear your backstory of how you got started and how that came to be.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I got started right post mission. I don't know how many of your listeners are LDS or not, but uh, a lot of LDS guys go on missions or are missionaries for 2 years, a lot of times directly out of high school or after a year or so of college. So, my career started after that. And like a lot of guys that serve a mission, I jumped right into door to door and did that for a couple of years. And then after doing that for a couple years, my dad actually approached me and said, "Hey, I want to go on a mission, do a service mission." With him and my mom wanted to go do a service mission for a couple of years for the church. And so he approached me and said, "Hey, will you move back to our hometown, Snowflake, Arizona? Just kind of watch over the business," was kind of the essential thing. Like, be my eyes and ears. I'm not quite sure how to do this, but just come be my eyes and ears that I know, like, I can trust you 100% if someone's not telling me the truth of what's going on and whatnot. So that was the plan. Me and my wife moved back to our hometown. We were going to do that for the time that they were gone and then continue on with their lives. We did that. And about a week before my dad left, uh, he sat me down and he was like, "Hey, I don't know why, but I actually want to make you president of the company, and I don't want to have a single phone call while I'm on my mission about this business. So, like, I just need you to take it." And so at that point, I was probably like 22, 23, um, and was like, uh, I'm not too sure what I'm supposed to do, but okay, that sounds great. And so he did that. He left, and that was kind of the start of a lot. When I took over the company, we were doing, I don't remember exactly, but probably like $3 or $4 million a year. We had literally like maybe a month prior just made an acquisition of a competitor, and so it was like I've got this real company, right? Not a ginormous company or anything, but this real company, zero experience in leading a company or business acumen. My whole career for my 2 year career had been door to door sales. So that was really the start of it. Obviously, it being a family company, I've grown up around it and, you know, did stuff all throughout high school, like working in it, but nothing about management level or how the business actually ran. So I could dive down the stuff that happened in that and give you a bunch of stories. But that's how it got started of me running the company and eventually, having some ownership and where that all led.
Wow. As you're sharing the story of being 22 years old and your dad has a $4 million business that he basically just puts into your hands, the first thing that came to my mind was the level of character that you must have for your dad to trust you, to know, like, okay, my son doesn't know what he's doing, but I trust him that he'll figure it out. And he's a hardworking dude that's gonna do this the right way. And I can just let go of that. That's a wow. That's a huge level of trust.
I think there was definitely some trust there, and there was also like, oh, I've got some good managers, like they'll bring them along. And my dad's just he's one of those guys like if God tells him to do something, he's like, all right, I'll do it. And he just felt like he'd received an inspiration that he needed to completely step away, be 100% on the mission he was going to go on, and 1,000% focused on that. So I would imagine for him, it wasn't like I'm totally sure about this, but yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. There definitely was a level of confidence that my dad had in me that, like, hey, I can trust you. I didn't even know what it meant at the time, but at the time he signed over a power of attorney and everything. Like, hey, man, you go. I don't want to be called to sign anything. You take this and run. So I do tell people I'm so grateful for that. That's obviously a huge leg up to be like, hey, start running this company. No one else would have given me that opportunity. But I do tell people, I'm like, you want to feel pressure, the pressure of what your dad spent the last, 10 years building and growing, and then you're in charge of it. Like it was such a great opportunity to take over a family business, but it's also a completely different level of pressure to be like, hey, I built this business and if it goes wrong, that stinks. Not my dad's entire net worth is wrapped up into this business. So it was interesting, but super grateful for it.
Wow. And is that the same business that you own today?
No, so we actually sold that business a little over 3 years ago.
All right. So walk me down the next step of this journey here. You get the business, you're 22 years old, it's worth about 3 to $4 million. And is that like a couple of trucks, or, what does that look like in terms of employees and how many trash trucks?
I don't remember exactly, but I'd say 15 to 20 employees, good number of trucks. Like it was a very well established business. We had a manager, COO per se, right? A shop, it was a substantial business. And yeah, when I stepped in, I can remember the first few months. I would show up and I'd make sure I was there before anyone. I had no idea what to do. I'd go into my office, I'd shut the door, and literally most of the day I was just sitting there. And I was like, I'd sit there until everyone else left because I didn't know what I was supposed to do. Obviously, stuff would pop up a little bit of things to do, but like that was the spirit of what I was doing. It was like show up before anyone else, leave after everyone else, and just like I'm not sure what to do. And then after a month or two of that, I was like, oh, I've got to do something here with this. Like I cannot just like the last thing I want is that 2 years passes and my dad comes back and I'm like, didn't do like nothing happened or something bad happened. I didn't know how to react. So having just done door to door, I can still remember the day where I was just like, I'm just going to start like selling, like calling people, trying to sell. And so I just started doing cold calls. And so I started doing that. And over time, that was the momentum starter that I needed. And so I started doing that. I then saw an opportunity to market in a way that no other trash company I had saw was marketing. We began doing a lot of really heavy marketing. I started being super interested in learning all about leadership and what we experienced is we just start to grow pretty significantly and we're adding managers and starting to have like a pretty significant team. And I'd say maybe like a year in, I felt like I actually had my feet underneath me. And at that time, the business was growing at a pretty steady and substantial rate.
Okay, so about a year in, you've kind of got your teeth in the business now, so to speak, and things are really growing. How big did the company grow by the time you sold it? What did that look like?
So by the time we sold it, we were doing in the ballpark of $10 million a year. And then something I really tell people to focus on if they have a company, like obviously cash flow is the most important thing that keeps you alive. But I tell people to focus on the enterprise value. Um, that's just like personally focusing on your net worth, right? It's a very useful measuring stick, and keeps you from getting caught up in spending all your cash, right? It's like if the goal is to have the enterprise value 2x, 3x, 4x, whatever it is, then you're going to make wiser, smarter decisions than if you're like, oh, cool, we kicked off $2 million a year this year. I'm going to take 75% of that and leave 25% of the company. Like you'll turn around in 5 years and realize you've got broke down equipment and all sorts of problems, right? But if you're focusing on enterprise value as that's the goal that you orient yourself for, you make really wise decisions and you find yourself reinvesting in the company over it. And so that was a really neat thing. Like we'd grown significantly in revenue that we were doing per year, but the really valuable thing was our enterprise value had increased substantially. And so the multiple we were able to sell for was significant.
So, how long did you own the company from the time your dad made you president to the time you sold?
It was about 5 years.
5 years. And during that time, are you reinvesting everything back into the business? Are you paying yourself a salary? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, yeah. So that's always kind of a funny story that like me and my wife know, but no one else in my family knows. So, go doing door to door. I was kind of like a middle of the road door to door guy. I did all right, but door to door can make you pretty good money. So I was making anywhere from like 100 to 150 because when I wasn't in the summer, I wasn't going to school or anything. I clean pools or pick up another regular job, and so I was making anywhere from 100 to 150K a year. Uh, when my dad brought me into the company, he was like, "Hey, I'm going to pay you 50 grand a year to run this," and in his mind, that was like I'm hooking him up. Like this is great. Well, it's actually something he doesn't even know about. Like only me and my wife know. Like I took a huge pay cut to go run the business. But after a year and a half, when I felt like I had my feet underneath me, I did give myself a more substantial salary. But um, I didn't know it at the time. It was plenty enough for me and my small family at the time. But for the size of the business, it was a very modest salary. I was taking like 100 K a year, and then had benefits like a pickup and things like that. But a modest salary for a CEO of a company that size. So yeah, I was taking the salary, but besides that, I was taking the salary. I'd increased my dad's salary, which he wasn't even aware of because those were just checks that were going to a bank for him, and had increased his significantly as well. And part of that was, my dad. He he's the hardest worker I know. So like growing up, he had he had his trash company, he had a trucking company, he was always doing a car wash company. Like he was just a guy that worked. And that's really what he based the business and growing the business on. It was like him, a couple key people working their faces off. And when I showed up, and this did take a couple of years, I didn't come in with this knowledge, but being really hungry and getting mentors, reading books, listening to podcasts, doing all that, I started to understand systems and how operations work and things like that. So as part of the growth of the company and then the ease of running it, I was a big stickler on standard operating procedures. And, I just kind of formed my whole business philosophy. And I would say I'm more of an operations guy than a sales guy. I'm like a 7 on sales, but like a 10 on operations. And so we got it tight where it was running good. It was like SOPs, job descriptions, org charts. When I got there wasn't org charts. Like there was a story our COO would tell me when he was working with my dad a couple years before I took over. He had went and put general manager on his business cards, And my dad called him in the office and was like, I didn't say you're general manager. What is this? And he's like, well, I do this, 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 and this. What else are you going to call me? Like, and I just say that story of my dad was real old school, like just go in, get it done. That way of doing business, uh, because of when and how I got brought in, I was able to kind of turn it more from ma and pa, a very successful ma and pa. Don't get me wrong, but ma and pa to more of a business operation that could run. Where after year 2 or 3, everything day to day would happen 100% without me. Even management was pulled out of day to day pretty significantly, and they were much more overseen and very rarely in the day to day operations. And so doing that just led that up. And I'll just continue with the story if that's good with you,
Yeah.
because yeah, us being the first time out, I would imagine there'd be different questions if you had the context. Basically, what happened is my dad returned after 2 years. And he said, "Great, let's go meet the office." After a week or two of them being back and meeting family and the celebrations and all that. Like, great, it's time for us to go sit down in your office and let's discuss. And so, I had all the financials and everything ready, and you know, basically, hey, this is what I've done with the company since you've been gone. And so we discussed that, and it was like, great, awesome, thank you, I'm super proud of you. It was an awesome meeting. And then my standpoint from there was like, hey, I have really enjoyed this. I would love to continue doing what I'm doing, but I'm only going to do it one way. And that's if it continues exactly like it has for the past couple of years, meaning I'm 100% in charge. I'm running this company. I am not going to be a like puppet CEO, fake CEO, where you're really pulling all the strings. I got to go get approval from you. No hard feelings if you don't want that, but I know there will be hard feelings if we go down this road of, you know, uh, uh, unclarity of who's doing what and who's in charge of what. So, he was like, honestly, he actually lived 3 hours away from where the business was as well. And so he was like, to be completely honest, I'd love to be going on another mission sometime in the next 5 years. That works for me. And it did work. There was definitely some hairy times, right? Like now that he's actually there was definitely some conversations of, him stepping in a lot of time. He still wanted to be active in something. He just didn't want to be full time. So he would lots of times, run equipment around for us, get parts and things like that. And there'd be times where I'd have to sit him down because he's saying something to an employee or to a manager or something. It's like, hey, you don't understand the impact of the conversations you have because you're just like this unknown guy that most employees don't know, but you're like the legend around here. So when you come
Mhm.
in, correct a guy. So anyway, it wasn't like it was the cleanest thing ever, but it worked and it was great. But it was really clear to me that I need to get that company bought because I'm looking at it and I'm like, holy crap. Like, if I would have bought this company the day I stepped in, it would have been worth less than half than what it's worth today. So I need to get this bought because every day I'm working this company, I'm driving the price up for myself. And so we spent probably 6 months going back and forth, having the discussion about purchasing. And then, when he was really in a place like, okay, yeah, let's get this done. We then went through all the work of evaluations. I went and got a partner, worked with the bank, got the money, everything to make the full purchase of the company. There was some other things I was doing at the time that had the large public companies very interested in what we're doing. Namely, I was building a landfill. And
Mm.
so there's kind of three phases of a trash company or three levels of trash company. There's haulers that use other people's transfer stations or landfills. There's companies that have their own transfer stations that take someone else's landfills. And then there's companies that have transfer station and landfills. And a landfill is like a 300-year asset. And so once you have a landfill as a company, like you're either around forever or you'll go public. There's like,
Mm.
you're a problem for the big guys once you do that. Like you might be a little thorn in their side, taking market share in your little corner of the world. before then. But if you get a landfill, it's like, okay, this guy's a problem. So as we were going through the sale, I had another company and uh, we were building the landfill, doing a couple other things with the idea of like, hey, before the year is up, I'm gonna own this company. Stop going to the current landfill. We'll have our landfill open, and again, kind of focusing on that enterprise value, it'll exponentially increase the value of this company, and it will lower our costs. Like it was just a win-win deal. However, as we were fighting to get that landfill permitted and everything, the big guys had their lawyers and everyone else trying to stop that happening. And so, as soon as that permit gets cleared and it was not going to be stopped and was going to go, we started getting calls and offers for the company, and they were significantly more than the valuation that we had come to what the company would have been worth for me to purchase it and to use like a SBA loan or a bank to be able to purchase this company. We were now out of that range at those offers.
Mm.
And so, it was a tough situation because, I kind of figured the rest of my career was growing this business and it was going to be something that my kids, grandkids, great grandkids, I'd kind of figured, hey, this is the Larson empire that we're going to build here. But now we're in this situation where it's like I'm either asking my dad to take a big bath by selling it to me, or he sells this, I get a portion of it, and it was a great run. And because of a lot of factors, and I think both of us like to, both me and my dad at times, kind of daydream of what if not. But because of all those factors at the time, it was like, I can't ask you to take this huge bath. I'm just going to need 10% of whatever you sell it for. And I think that's a fair ask because 100% you built the base, but I was able to go pretty tall off of this base. So, you know, give me 10%, you take 90%, and you know, we'll maintain the family relationships, or won't be hard feelings, and we can move on. So, end of the day, that's some of the context with it, but end of the day, that's how
Wow.
it how we ended up selling.
Wow. So how much did you sell the company for?
So we sold the company for 20 million.
And so you took 10% of that, so 2 million was your cut?
Yep. Yep. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I've told a couple guys this, but if you've ever thought you're stressed about money, try getting a lump sum when you're not sure how you're supposed to manage large amounts of money personally, because it's a little bit different, like cash flow in and out with the company. You've always got equipment, land, all this stuff you could buy. And, you put $1 in, you get $5 out, like yada, yada. And to get a chunk of change and be like, taxes, like I, I've now kind of moved more into what I call maybe the private equity world, like, for lack of a better term. So I look back now and think, oh man, if I could have had the knowledge I've gained over the past 3 years, right when I got that money, that would be fantastic. But uh, it was like just a chunk of change that I felt like I don't know what to do with this. I don't know if the government's going to take most of it. How I go about this. So it was awesome, but also probably the most stress I ever felt in my life. And it was a great example for me of relationship with money and how it has actually almost nothing to do with how much money you have or don't have.
Can you expand on that, what you just said, where it was a good example of your relationship with money and how it has nothing to do with how much money you have?
Yeah, yeah. So like I'd say for the listeners, but I'll say it to you, like, if you like get in your mind's eye and you imagine yourself, you know, having $5,000 of bills that you need to pay and recognizing that in your account you've only got 2,000, so you've got this $3,000 gap. And like even as I say that, I can feel like inside me there's something going on, even just imagining
The
that situation.
anxiety.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then like imagine that I walked up and was like, hey, no strings attached. Like I just want to give you $10,000. Um, and like I can like in that imaginary situation, if you're imagining yourself in that in your mind's eye, Like you can feel your emotion, your anxiety, your stress come up as you're thinking of, I owe $5,000. I've only got two. And then you can feel the relief that comes of this imaginary person saying, "Hey, I got $10,000 for you, no strings attached. Like, I just really want to give this to you." And so, like, I think that's such a great example of the power that money can have. In a fake example, it can rise and lower your internal state. And so that's how I'd say, like, my experience has been that that doesn't change depending on the money that you have in your bank account. Like that's something that you've got to handle inside of what your relationship is with money. Because until you've got that handled, you're just going to be on a roller coaster, no matter how many zeros there are. And so that's what I mean when I'd say like, yeah, your
Yeah.
relationship with money, like it's not the amount. If you've got a bad relationship with money and it causes you stress in any way, you've got to fix that because the zeros in your bank account won't fix it.
Wow, and this is coming from someone that had a $2 million check.
It's, yeah, yeah. I was like, because logically, right, I could sit there and I could think, like, I could open up my bank account and see like more money than I've ever seen in my personal bank account, right? And it's like, holy crap. And realize that, you know, there was a story that my mind created around that. Like, I'm living on a lake now, not a river. Like, this is so stressful. Like, I'm freaking out. Every penny that gets spent, I feel like, yeah, but this is a limited resource now, you know? Well, it took some work to be like, all right, what is money? Like, how do I interact with it? Do I let it control me? Like, I don't want anything outside of me to ever control me. And I realized this is controlling me like 100%. And so, yeah, it was like a real realization that took, you know, a good amount of time to even recognize because I'm just walking around like I'm living more scarce than I've ever lived. And I have more cash than I've ever had.
I want to pause here for a second and add a few of my thoughts. Garrett just mentioned that he sold his business for $20 million. He has $2 million sitting in his checking account, and it's the most stressed that he's ever felt about money. For anyone listening in this episode that you think making more money is going to help you feel better about your financial situation, I hope this is a wake up call that that's not the case. But I also want you to know that you're not alone in feeling that way. Garrett is sharing very openly how stressful it was for him to go through that situation. I've experienced the same emotions in my own business when I was starting my business, and Garrett felt that when he was exiting his business. So it's very normal, and you're not alone. If you feel like you could use some extra help navigating that emotional side of money, please reach out to me. There's a link in the description below this video. You can schedule a call with me, and that's actually something I specialize in my one-on-one financial coaching practice is helping people navigate that emotional side of money. In this next part of the episode, I'm going to be asking Garrett how he worked through some of those emotions. And then I'm also going to be sharing my personal experience of how I've worked through some of those emotions as well. So I hope that helps. I would love for you to share, you get this $2 million from selling the business. What were some of the emotions that it brought up, and how did you eventually work through that?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it was, it was a death of a dream kind of to me. Like I just pictured, okay, like this is, and there was a lot of identity tied up in it. Like I viewed myself like I'm Garrett the Trash Man. Like I am going to be the person in this country that's the face of trash. Like that's what my goal was. And it's like, I'm gonna build this empire. So it was 5 years of this is my future, this is the dream I'm working for. And it's not that that was totally crushed, but it felt like the avenue that I had envisioned would take me there was now gone. And so it it was definitely it was a rattling experience. And it's something that I if I'm being completely frank, like it's something that's still getting worked on as I speak. Like last night, me and my wife, I grew up without TV. So I never got to watch The Apprentice back in the early 2000s when it was out. And anyway, for some reason it crossed mine and my wife's radar. So we've been watching that the last couple of weeks. We'll watch The Apprentice. And last night, we were watching an episode and my wife's like, "Hey, you used to like have the same confidence and like energy and everything of how Trump acts." She's like, "I really miss you like acting and being that way." And I was like, "Wow, yeah, like that was like I'm still kind of recovering from what I would say was like my dream or my vision for my life being completely shifted."
Wow. Oh man, that's really tough feedback to hear from your wife.
Yeah, you know, you got a good woman if she'll, no hesitation, let you know what you need to hear.
Wow. So, oh man, I just feel like I'm just trying to internalize that situation too of everything that you've been through. It's interesting because you talk about all of the time and sweat and tears you put into growing this company. And I think from an outsider's perspective looking in, it's your payday, it's your huge success. And it sounds like what you're describing from your perspective kind of felt like the rug was pulled out from underneath you, that
Yeah,
suddenly,
yeah, definitely, and it's something that, in a different context, I might not share it in that way, but in the hope that, like, I can bring any value being on this podcast with a listener, like, I know my situation is a little bit rare, like, most family businesses aren't that great, and then most family businesses fall apart in a transition from one generation to the next, or at least significantly decrease. But there's a portion that don't, and the stories like my story, and it's like it is incredible. It's like I feel so blessed, but the reality is just like everything, it's a double-edged sword. It's like yes, it's these incredible blessings. So grateful, you know, but there's some real cost to all of that, and it is, the emotional things. And, just to something I tell business owners all the time, because I'll get calls with guys looking to sell their business just because I've now been through the process, right? Which is a process that, in reality, not a ton of people have been through it. And it is quite a process to sell a company. And so they'll start asking me about it, and I'm like, "Hey, unless you've got a exact plan of what you're gonna do with the money, don't sell your business, and don't even think about it. Build the plan of exactly what you're gonna do, because otherwise, you'll sell your business and you'll look for a business exactly like the business you had and put your money in. And money doesn't stand still. It wants to be used, it wants to move, it wants to be duplicated, and so you've got to have somewhere to put that money. If you're looking at money as energy, you've got to have somewhere to put that energy, and you got to have someone to put your energy. Because the idea of like sell, kick back, and not have a worry in the world, like it's just not reality, especially for most entrepreneurs that like are entrepreneurs because they're creators, not
yeah.
they're not able to sit back and twiddle their thumbs and enjoy hanging out by their pool or something.
Yeah, it's like if you spend your whole life building, how do you turn that switch off?
Exactly. Exactly. And it's a funny experience too because, since the sale and whatnot, uh it's been about 3 years, and I've put a lot of that money to work. I spent some of that money, and like it's funny to be in a position now where I sit back and I go, okay, like my net worth looks good. That's that's fantastic. But cash flow is not as like ideal as what I would want it to be. And so it's a funny experience just to like, if you don't have a plan, it can be very very stressful. Not that I didn't have any plan or anything. Like, investing in businesses, one of the businesses that I'm running right now with Jason that you had on another episode, there's definitely stuff in the work, but I've gone from a comfortable job that was paying me enough that cash flow was more than enough to having a big bulk of money that just sat there to deploying that money and now waiting for the deployment of that money to come back to me. And I think it just speaks to, if you're going to play this game, you've got to have a good emotional relationship with money, like I was saying earlier, because you'll be going through these different cycles, at least early. From my perspective, I imagine by the time I'm 45, 50, it's a little bit different. There's a lot more of a base. But if you're in your 20s or 30s, you're going to be up and down in this cycle of uh, good cash flow, low net worth, high net worth, low cash flow. It's really maybe it's more like stepping stones than a cycle, but it's a very interesting thing that I'm living right now. And speaking as if I know, but also I'm just saying, hey, this is how I see it now, and I may listen to this 10 years from now and be like, what an idiot.
You know what's funny is I can directly relate to what you're describing. I've never sold a business for $20 million, but I've experienced that roller coaster you're describing where I actually worked in door to door sales as well. I did 3 years of door to door sales. And funny enough, the most amount of money I've ever made in a single year was my last year doing door to door. And so it's like, okay, I go from having great cash flow to being really smart, saving and investing that money, working a couple more years in other jobs. And then I decided to leave corporate and start my own financial coaching practice. It's like overnight, I had that comfortable salary and it went down to zero. And on paper, I knew I was going to be fine, right? Because I had the savings, I had the investments that I had carefully been building for several years. But in reality, if you take that consistent paycheck where you just always know exactly how much you're going to get paid and that drops to zero overnight, it can be a harrowing experience for anyone.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And I've experienced that just well, it'd be a year ago now. So directly after the sale, there was a couple of trash companies that were outside of my non-compete that I had gone to try to purchase. There was a couple that came real close and then fell through, and different things like that. So more than money, I mean, I really felt like I needed money, but on paper, more than needing money, I needed something to do with myself. Right. Like I felt like I couldn't go another day where I woke up and was like, what do I do today? And so I'd actually ended up taking what was essentially a consulting job. Like basically, it was like, "Hey, come in. We've got some problems in our company. Like, will you step in and fix all these problems?" And so I did that for 2 years, and it was a funny experience where it was like, the owner would step out, say, hey, I got myself in this mess. You're fixing this mess. I will stay out of your way. But then he could step in whenever he wanted. And I felt that essentially what I'm saying is I was working for someone else. And I fought that for like 2 years. And then finally I was like, I don't think I can keep doing this. And again, going back to my wife, she was basically like, I don't care if we have to live in a camp trailer somewhere. I don't like who you are right now. I want an old you back. So do whatever you've got to do. So I spent the last 2025, January of 2025, I left that job that was very similar, a comfortable, very comfortable monthly salary that came in. And it was like, okay, cool. Now I've got this big nest egg. I've got this cash flow that, you know, covers my expenses and then some, but it just clearly was not working. I had to do very similar to what you're describing of just leave that and know I was going to go buy a business, didn't know what business, where, but I wasn't going to work for anyone else anymore. And it's a crazy thing because just like you said, it's there on paper. It's like, okay, I could go 3 years. And if I don't make another penny, I've got a 3 year runway here. But it's like month one that you're pulling out of that savings account to live. It's like, oh man, I'm sure this worked out real fast.
Yeah, yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy how that happens.
So I'm curious, did you have, since you did that, did you have any nights where, you'd wake up in the middle of the night, your mind would start going, you'd start thinking of everything that could go wrong and how, before you know it, you're kicked out of your house and you and your family are homeless.
Yeah, and, I'll share a little bit more about the experience. So I was working in tech sales, and I had similar to you, you mentioned being a person of faith, and your dad was as well. I felt unfulfilled in the job where I was. Like, I wasn't really making a difference for the world. I was just kind of, putting in my time and earning a paycheck. And I felt very strongly that I needed to do something different, and landed on this idea of becoming a financial coach and working with people one on one, making a difference for them. But I was really scared. I actually tried once, and then something happened where I got scared and I totally backed off. And instead of jumping into doing my own thing, I went and took another job that had a pay increase. And actually, for context, my wife was pregnant. So I was
Mhm.
scared to go off on my own because my wife was pregnant.
Yeah.
And so when I found out she was pregnant, I was like, I can't do this. She's having to quit her job with the pregnancy, and she wants to be at home with our son. And so I went and got another job. And as soon as I got there, I knew I'd made the wrong choice. And so I lasted there 6 months, and there was a rule that the company had to be there 6 months to qualify for paternity leave. And it was literally like the day my son was born that I hit the 6-month mark. So I was like, okay, I have 2 months of paternity leave. Let me take this and run with it and see if I can really build something for myself. But to your point, that experience where I've got a wife and a 2-month-old son, and I go talk to my boss and I say, "Hey, I'm gonna finish out the projects I'm working on," and that's it. And wow, I had with my own business, I'd mostly been working behind the scenes. So I only had, I think, one client at the time that was paying me a very low amount of money. It was almost for free. And I would wake up in the middle of the night and I would think about, how am I gonna do this? And like you described, my brain was just churning for hours trying to figure out, how am I going to do this? How am I going to provide for my family? Is it really going to be enough? You really do have to kind of face those skeletons in the closet and those fears that you have head on.
Yeah. Yeah. And one thing I definitely realized through that experience that I'll say just in case there's any listeners that are going through that right now, you cannot fight demons in bed. You will maybe give yourself 20, 30 minutes to fall back asleep. And if you haven't fallen asleep, I don't care if it's 3 a.m. Get out of bed, go to the gym, right? Whatever you've got to do, but you'll realize, that's when the demons creep in is when you're in bed, half awake, you'll come up with the craziest stories of disaster that are going to strike. But as soon as you get up, pray, move a little bit, you'll see, like, okay, this, I'm a creator. I'm here for a purpose. God tells me he's willing to give me anything and it's his pleasure. I just have to ask, you know, that's like your faith is at its weakest laying in bed, letting those crazy thoughts run. And so you gotta step up and move. And yeah, I just want to share that because when I finally figured that out, man, my life got significantly better because instead of 2 or 3 times a week, going through hours of hell laying in bed that served nothing. I never once have laid in bed and figured an actual solution out to a problem, but
Yeah.
I've created a lot of problems and suffered through a lot of imaginary problems while laying in bed.
Yep. That's very true. And, it's funny you mentioned that idea of sometimes the best medicine for that middle of the night stress is just work. And I found that to be true too. It'd be like 2 a.m. I'd wake up, my wife's totally asleep, and I'd just go get my laptop and I'd start writing. And, I have a personal finance newsletter that I write, and I would just write my newsletter at 2 a.m. because that was what took the edge off the stress. And, hour later, I fall back asleep and I'm okay.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And it's crazy. And it's kind of funny. I don't know how I feel about how, popular entrepreneurship and everything has become across social media and everything because it's gets glamorized on that, right? It's like, it's all the hustle and yeah, just go and grind and this and that's all true. It's not that it's untrue, but it's not the full story. And so you've got to know that it's really the direction you need to go, or you're going to be, you probably haven't heard how excruciating it can be. And it's not about work. Like, I think a lot of people can work a lot of hours and work really hard, but it's about, and I'm speaking for myself, like it's for everyone, but it's about the emotions that will go on and the unknown. And but I don't think, other than entrepreneurship, I don't think there's anything that, well, maybe marriage, but outside of that, there's nothing that I think will grow you and increase your faith and just push you to be a better creator than entrepreneurship. So, guys that feel the call for it, like, you've just got to go do it. But if you think it just looks cool and it's what you're seeing all the guys you like on Instagram do, it's hold off. You'll probably be happier collecting a paycheck, and that's not a bad life either.
Yeah, it's not as sexy as people make it out to be. One thing I want to share from the spiritual side, since you mentioned it, is that's something that really calls to me is, I believe that we're created in the image of God. And if you think about God, he is at his core a creator. Like he created the earth, he created us, he created all of the creatures and all of the beauty around us. And there's nothing that can bring you closer to God than to strive to be like him and to be a creator. And for some people, that might be creating a business where you bless the lives of other people. It might be creating a beautiful marriage or a beautiful, family and raising children, whatever it is. But the more you can focus on shifting into that mode of creation, the greater happiness and fulfillment you will find, hands down.
Yeah, I agree completely. You know, what I'd say to that is, God has his commandments, what to do, what not to do. But it really, the purpose of those is so we can become who he wants us to become. So the real sin that can happen is not becoming who God wants you to become. And so, like, that's the real tragedy. And I think it's actually the real hell, is if you sit back and realize you could have been so much more and you weren't. So, I just, like, don't get caught up in the minutia of how do I do what? Like, go be a powerful creator. God gave you this life, and he expects and hopes that we'll go do as much as humanly possible with it. And when I read the scriptures, I look at the characters of the Bible, and it's like, a lot of anti-God people will point out that those aren't always the most upstanding men. You see a lot of characters in the Bible that, you know, maybe aren't teetotaler, follow every rule people, but what they are is they're powerful creators living very, very powerfully. And that really calls to me. So I love what you said there, because I really think that's the whole purpose we're here for, is to create as powerfully as we've got the capacity to do.
Wow, Garrett, I just want to say, talking to you has been absolutely inspiring for me. I love hearing your story. I love how honest you've been about, the emotional side that you go through with money and as a business owner. And, I think just to kind of close here, for anyone that's maybe listened to this conversation today, my number one takeaway from you and from what we've been talking about is be willing to dare greatly. And either you will succeed or you will fail, but either way, you will be better off than if you stood on neutral ground the whole way through. And it's just been absolutely incredible conversation. Thank you so much for all of your wisdom you've shared.
Yeah, I don't know if it's wisdom, but it's the philosophy that's running me. So, yeah, man, I appreciate you having me on. And yeah, I love what you're doing. I think that's super cool and needed, the financial coaching. I definitely probably could still use it, and definitely could have used it for a lot of periods in my life. So, yeah, and it's super cool to hear, you know, your, I don't even want to say struggles, but the incredible experience and the steps of faith you took to go off into the dark and create something yourself.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm going to embarrass you a little bit. As you were sharing your story of the trash company, I couldn't help but think about the parable of the talents in the Bible, where, the Lord, he goes to his three servants, he gives them 1 talent, 2 talents, and five. And when you describe sitting in that office, you were the 5 talent servant. Your dad gave you this incredible opportunity, but it was up to you to take that and to make it something even more. And for him to come back 2 years later and to say, Dad, I took what you gave me. You gave me 5 talents. Here's 10. And I think that's an absolute testament to your dad putting his trust in you, but also you rising to the challenge. And I think anyone can learn from that example of leadership. So thank you for sharing.
No, I appreciate you saying that.
Thanks for watching. If you made it to the end of this video, you must have liked it. So hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.